An interesting Wednesday race, as if I do say so myself, in the PacFan WCS series, the seventh round over at the Belgian Grand Prix, in which for the first time in a long while we've seen neither Big nor Bullet coming anywhere close to the top two grid spots. The pole ended up going to Static Energy, which has been a long time coming for a while. He's already netted himself 2 race wins in the past 7 rounds, as well as setting a few fastest laps. So, good showing from Static Energy, setting a beautiful banker lap toward the 8 minute mark of the qualifying session, only to have Travic and No Not Really come close to it by about 2 or 3 tenths toward the end within the final 5 minutes. So, good job from Static for netting himself his first career ever pole, and good showing from Travic and No Not Really, who were there and thereabouts but seemed to have a few issues just getting the car under wraps for the session. But we have Static Energy for pole in the race win overall. Travic came second in the race, as well as No Not finishing fourth after qualifying in fourth position. So we really didn't move many places. We also had the not much of a show from Big. He had quite a few difficulties in qualifying. You could see them kind of emerge a little bit in practice, but he was a little bit more concerned about the race pace in the first practice session. But just look from the onboard on some of the live broadcasts, actually, that they did end up having, but getting rid of for the first practice session, and it seemed like Big and Bullet both were struggling a little bit on the corner entry of some of the high speed corners, which leads me to believe they were either running less aero or just a understeery balance on the mechanical end. But the the kind of understeer I'm talking about was quite evident when you saw Biggs run on to Puon into qualifying, where he got all 4 wheels off into the rumble strip before rejoining to the track surface and missing the second apex of Puon and not getting a good run in either. We had quite a lonely race from him, as well as No Not Really, who was in second in the opening lap. He was just behind the leader of Static Energy when we had the first lap, or the first 2 lap qualm between the some of the drivers and some of the broadcast members. One of them, of course, was marooned on the track for a little while, causing some yellow flags in the middle of the first lap of the race. But that got cleared up, and Static Energy did, of course, start pulling a little bit of a gap to No Not Really after he had his little off in the middle of Les Combes. He was trying to transfer the weight of the rear of his car to try and effectively make the left and then the right hander, and he ended up taking a little bit of a trip into the grass, having to take some of the off-road to rejoin. This is just a picture from either Travic, or I believe this might even be Stocky on the second lap of the race. A little bit of a throwaway race for No Not Really, as he was in second position in the opening laps and then trailed all the way down to sixth or seventh behind Big O, and had to then re-overtake Big and try and drive his way back up into the top spots. Didn't quite make it. He made it into fourth position, about a good 30 seconds behind Rip and Travic and Static, who ended up having a pretty decent battle toward the end of the race. Of course, Rip not having the best of tires and having Travic just skate ahead a little bit. Rip having to go back and nurse his tires for the end of the race. Travic seemed to have a little bit of advantage, but he wasn't completely able to capitalize it to try and steal the win away from Static Energy. It was about a 3-second split in between the cars, a second from Static and about a second from Travic to Rip, who drove a phenomenal race, I'd like to say, compared to a few of his other runs earlier in the season. But he did manage to keep his car on the podium, which isn't unexpected of Rip. He always has the pace for it, but he never always quite has the complete race. This is just a shot of Big. I believe this is Big on either Clag or Worthy. I'm not completely sure. I believe Worthy was in one of the unique liveries on the grid, but this is Big trying to work his way up the field in that Ferrari on the Ferretti compound at the beginning of the race. Big going really long on the tires. I believe he stopped in at about lap 20, around lap 20 or lap 18 for new tires, whereas everyone had already completed stops by that point. Did have him lead a few laps in the middle of the race, but didn't get him too far up the grid in the end results. This is just a little bit of a shot of, I believe this is Klagmeister, who had a really good run in qualifying. His car was looking very hooked up for the first and final parts of qualifying and even in warm-up. But again, he got another driver, and quite a few drivers had a bit of an issue into the first part of the second sector, just trying to get the transition right. And inevitably, with the type of driver that Clag is, he kind of loaded up the rears a little too much and put himself in the grass near the Armco bearers. I think he ended up running into them once, but he did end up rejoining and coming back on, but it did put him further down the order, and then he had another small shunt later in the race. I believe either coming out of Sector 3 or later on in Sector 2, and then again in the same transition area. So balance wasn't quite right for the race. Maybe something changed between warm-up and the race itself, because he was looking pretty good before the race started. He was looking like he could challenge for a top 5, his first top 5 ever in the series so far that I've seen. And overall, he's a pretty quick driver, and it's probably going to be a throwaway race for him. Pretty good race between Stocky and Scott Milk in the midfield for, I believe it was 7th and 8th. Stocky nursing his tires toward the end to see if he can get an attack on Scott Milk at the very end of the race, but unfortunately Scott Milk ended up going a little bit off track and getting a wheel off and receiving a time penalty, so he had to then hand the position to Stocky, which ended up netting him in 8th place. Stocky driving away to 7th, about a second or two clear of Scott Milk. But I believe that's about it for the entire raced weekend, other than the battle at the dying laps of the race between Static, Rip, and Travic. in which Travick drove a pretty standard race by his standards to land second place. A pretty good points position for him and the team, as well as Rip landing a P3. No, not really is going to have a P4, but he's not going to be all too upset because he did finish just ahead of Big by about an entire pit stop. So I bet he'll be delighted with that. In the standings, I believe I believe Static should jump Stocky in the standings for the entire season. There's just a shot of one of I believe the Panasonic cars just going off, coming out of Blanchimont. It was a very difficult corner Blanchimont ended up being, and another shot of Big O going through Eau Rouge. But that's about it for the race review. Stay tuned for later on in the week when we discuss some of the drivers not present for the first heat, or maybe even the second heat of the 7th round, as well as some thought processes going into a race evening. But I am your host, NearFear, and I'll catch you guys all in the next installment of the highlight reviews.